Good morning, guys. Welcome back to my channel. It's probably about 10 o'clock in the morning, and as you can probably tell, it's a really gloomy, gray day today. It's been raining all morning, so I figured I'd run out here real quick to be able to talk to y'all about something I've needed to take care of in my garden, a problem I've seen popping up, and that is that I need to fertilize it. That might seem like something that's super easy to do, but I found out that it can get pretty darn complicated, especially when you first start out and trying to learn about all the new stuff and all the information and how do you know what your plant needs, or when is the best time to fertilize it, or does it even need fertilizer? Like, these are all mystifying things that as a first-time gardener, at least for me, I've come into contact with, and the plant doesn't talk to you. It doesn't tell you what it needs. So sometimes you just have to guess, and then you can guess wrong, and maybe you give it the wrong nutrients. So I wanted to talk about what I've learned so far, and what I'm going to do in my garden to help it better, because I'm sure I showed y'all there are some plants that really could use the help of a little added fertilizer. So let's get into it. So starting off, it's like, okay, what is fertilizer? Why does my plant need it? Why do I even have to bother with it? Well, fertilizer can be a multitude of different things. Usually it is a nutrient that helps your plant grow. And plants, just like us, need a whole bunch of different nutrients in order to get big, strong, healthy. And then if you're a vegetable gardener like me, or a flower gardener, or what have you, to bear fruit, it needs to have these correct nutrients in order to be as productive as possible. So some signs that you might notice in your garden that your plant needs a little bit of this additional help of fertilizer. You could look at your plants if you see stunted growth. If your plant has been the same size for a while, that could be either that it's not having enough nutrients, or it can be over nutrients, because that's a thing too. You can over fertilize your plants, and that's not good either. You could notice that there is some yellowing of leaves, or if the leaves are falling off, or again, stunted growth, like your plant looks like it's healthy, but the new leaves coming in are a lot smaller than the other leaves. Or even if it comes to when it's time to be bearing fruit, is the fruit small? Is it reaching proper maturation? Like, these are all little signs that your plant gives you, saying that it needs some additional help. So the three big ones that you need to know about when it comes to fertilizers is your NPK, or nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And they'll show up, these three numbers, if you go to the store and you see a bag of fertilizer. Usually you'll see three numbers on it. I'll show you. It'll be on the side of your packaging sometime, usually. Like for this one, I have some blood meal. And if you look right there, you can see that it says 1200. Now, 1200, 12 is being your nitrogen. The middle number is your phosphorus, and then the last number is your potassium. If you've taken chemistry, the K for potassium, that helps you remember it because it's based off of those. It's based off of the elemental names. So blood meal right here, you can see, really bad for phosphorus and potassium, but great for nitrogen. And there's a whole assortment of different things. So you saw that was the blood meal, but I also have some bone meal right here. A similar looking package, different color. But if you turn and you take a look, then you can see it says 4120. So a lot less nitrogen, a whole bunch more phosphorus, and no potassium. So all of your fertilizer packages can have completely different numbers on them, and that can be confusing. It's like, well, what do I do? What's the best? Which one do you buy? And I mean, I have made this mistake and bought tons of different fertilizers here. Like I have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 7 different types of fertilizers that I bought from the store that I felt the need to buy because I was still learning everything when I first started gardening this past year. And I just went ham. And some things I bought are really great, and I've enjoyed them. And then other things that I bought, I found out later on that either I was misusing them or they weren't the best product for my plants and for what I want to have as a gardener myself in my garden. So I'm just going to teach you a little bit about that. So one of the big lessons I learned, and this might not be important to you, every gardener is different. What matters to you is different. Not trying to shame anyone. For me, though, I am doing my best to try and be an organic gardener. I find that I would really, yes, I want beautiful vegetables and beautiful plants, but I don't want that to be at the cost of being detrimental to the environment around me. To me, it's just not fair if I have great produce, but then the grass or the woods or the animals around me suffer because I'm mishandling some products. So I've tried my best to get some organic fertilizers, but I have made mistakes. I haven't looked carefully enough. And in my initial confusion of being a first-time gardener and not knowing what to get and just really wanting to do the best I can and get the best stuff for my plants, I have bought some non-organic fertilizer, and let's talk about it. So what I've got here is some, if you can see those numbers, 10, 10, 10. And when I first looked it up, it says right there, all-purpose fertilizer. Now that I've done a little bit more research about it, I found this can be dangerous for me to touch. It says that if I drop it, I'm supposed to clean it up. And the reason why is they don't want it to be rained on and then get into the local water system. It said on this bag, do not use it during immense downpours. Don't bother using it when there's going to be a lot of rain. Reason why, it's just going to flush through this product. This is a man-made product, and it's meant to be used quickly. It's not meant for long-term usage. It's meant for quick-term use. And if it were to rain suddenly right after applying this and really heavy downpour, it's just going to wash all those nutrients away. The plant's not going to get any of it, and then it's just going to go into our water supply. So, not the best. I know I have this large bag of it left over, but I've decided I really don't want to use at least this product, now finding out how detrimental it can be to the environment around me. Okay, so NPK fertilizers, how do these nutrients affect my plants? And that's really going to help you in determining what fertilizer is best to use at what time. So in nitrogen, how it affects plants, it usually helps plants when it comes to growing of leaves and making big, bright, leafy, for big, bright, leafy growth, and really helping your plant just get as tall as possible, which, you're like, okay, that's great. I want a big plant. But if you add too much nitrogen, your plant can focus on just making those lovely green leaves that it's so beautiful to see, but then it decides not to make the fruit that you really wanted your vegetable to have, and you end up with only 2 tomatoes versus 8 tomatoes, and we want 8 tomatoes, not 2. Although you should really be hoping for way more than 8 tomatoes if you're fertilizing right. So that's nitrogen, leafy growth. The P stands for phosphorus. What does phosphorus do for our plant? Well, phosphorus is really important on root development for your plants. Not only is it important for root development, though, it also helps with fruit production. If your plant doesn't have a good root system in place, and it's not going to be able to grow as big or as tall as it can get, it's not going to be able to really focus on being able to absorb all those nutrients. And then if you turn around and you also don't have enough phosphorus for the fruit development, then you can have a really, let's say tomato plant, a really tall tomato plant, but you could be getting really small, puny tomatoes that really aren't coming to fruition because they don't have enough phosphorus in their fertilizer mix. And then the K. K is for potassium. Now, potassium can be important for just overall plant health. It kind of works as the in-between for the nitrogen and the phosphorus, and it works as far down as to the root bottoms to the top of the plant, and just overall health and being able to transport all the nutrients. So these 3 nutrients can be really beneficial to your plant's health, but sometimes your plant might need one nutrient over the other. I already said with phosphorus, phosphorus is really handy for root growth and for those specific root vegetables. I might not need a fertilizer with too much nitrogen in it when I'm growing root vegetables, because that's going to encourage my plant to grow big, beautiful, bright leafy greens, which is pretty to look at. But then you pull that carrot out of the ground that looks like it's huge, and it has an itty bitty root because the plant was taking in more nitrogen than it needed, and that's where it focused its growth versus on the phosphorus that it needed for the root development. And it's not just with root plants. I know that blueberries usually use more phosphorus and potassium because they're a bit more acidic. Now, that's a whole nother thing, but knowing your plant and trying to figure out what stage of growth it's in can be really beneficial when you're wondering what fertilizer to give it. So now that we know what all the numbers mean, we can look a little bit more at the fertilizers I had here and try to figure out what best they'd be used for. I showed y'all the blood meal earlier, and again, super high in nitrogen. So blood meal would probably be something that is very good to add to your plants when they're first growing, when they're first little seedlings, to help them really focus on that leafy growth, but not also just focusing on leafy growth, but what type of plants. Great for tomatoes when they're young, great for collards, great for kale, anything that grows in the winter that has that leaf, which is what you eat, the salad. Blood meal would be great for when it's growing, but if you give it to it when it's already reached its full maturation point, then it's probably going to become more of a hindrance. It's going to unstabilize the plant. Got bone meal again. We saw this one too. Lower on nitrogen, but more on its phosphorus levels and no potassium. So this would probably be a fertilizer that'd be pretty good for root growth development. Because even though, like I was telling you earlier, that your root growth, it's needed, your plant needs all nutrients. It's those root vegetables, those carrots, those turnips, the onions, the garlic, they still need nitrogen, and they still need their leaves because that's one of the ways that they get energy. You don't want them to be huge and bushy because that's just a misproportion of nutrients, but you still do need those leaves. So bone meal would be great for root vegetables. And then let's see, this one is kind of a overall similar to all-purpose fertilizer. It's got 3, 4, and 4. Something like this, with it having a little bit of nitrogen and having more focus on the potassium and on the phosphorus, I think that this would be something great to amend your soil with right before you end up planting something. Because when that seed starts sprouting, they only have as much energy as they need to get to the top in order to get to the sun. And then once they start growing those roots, that phosphorus, that potassium is going to be there in order to help them really focus on their root structure, which you want them to as they're young. And then once they get that better, they start getting a little bigger. That's when you can start introducing more nitrogen to them if you need to focus on growing more leaves. But then you can also turn around and use this, and it's towards the end of your plant's life cycle, and you don't want them to focus on growing leaves. You just want general health purposes. And this would be good for the end of your plant's life cycle too, if you want to more so just focus on it. Again, we'll use the tomatoes as an example. Your tomatoes bearing fruit. You don't want it to produce any more leaves. You want it to focus on growing that fruit bigger and making it juicier and getting more out of your tomato plant. this would be a better fertilizer to use if your plant needs fertilizer. So these fertilizers that I just showed you are they are organic fertilizers, but we also have to think about the consistency of them. The bone meal and the blood meal are very fine, and when you put them in your soil, because they're already so fine particles, it's not going to take a lot of extra help to be able to have it breaking down to the point that your plant can use it in the soil. Because you can't just put fertilizer on and then just magic, it worked. It needs to be in a composition to where your plants can absorb it through their roots and be able to put it to use. The general garden tone fertilizer is a bit thicker. It has a bit more of a bead-like texture to it. If you can see that right there. It does still have some sandy, but there are some bigger clumps in it too. Still easier to break down with the finer texture, but those bigger clumps are going to come in a little bit for slow absorption of nutrients. There's different, what I'm trying to say is that different fertilizers have different breakdowns. Depending on what your plant needs, that's something to take into account too. Some of my plants that I have, I can see that they have yellow leaves. They're starting to drop some of their leaves. These are signs to me that they need extra nitrogen. Now, I did amend the soil before I planted any of these things, but I planted this stuff. This was my fall garden. Because of where I live in Georgia, it doesn't get too terribly cold, and all of my plants have been able to survive the winter thus far. But I added nutrients all the way back in fall, and as we can see, some of them are depleted now, and these plants need a little bit more attention in order to keep going. The fertilizers I have here in bag, these are really good access for a quick usage. They need it right now, but this is not something that's necessarily needed. You don't have to run out and go get these bags from your Home Depot, your Lowe's, or your garden supply store. I find that I need it because of the type of gardening that I do. All of my gardening is either in pots or in a form of raised bed, but it is a bed that has a bottom. So they're not even quite raised beds. They're just really, really, really big pots. I don't have any ground to allow my planter boxes to have that connection to the ground. They have to have lids because of the patio that I work on. It's a concrete patio. I can't just, if I were to not have a bottom, then all of my soil would just end up washing away onto the concrete patio, and it would not be good. So I like to use some of these types of fertilizers because it helps replenish the soil when it can't do it more easily. On top of the fertilizers I have available to me, there's some that I don't have here. Plenty of people can use different types of manure, chicken or cow manure that's been broken down, or some sort of compost. They might have a compost pile. They might use earth castings. There's even just built up wood chips that can decompose over time. There's so many different methods you can use to help add nutrients back to your soil. But these methods involve having more organisms to help break down all this stuff. Because I have big pots, it's not really conducive to a healthy natural soil environment. Unfortunately, I don't have earthworms in my pots. They don't want to be in my pots. There's no room for them. I understand that. Other people who are growing in ground can use worms to help aerate their soil or add castings. They can put that manure on top that then have other microorganisms, earthworms, bugs come down to help break it down to make it more useful for the plant. I don't have that type of biodiversity in my soil, which is why I use these quicker fixes in order to give my plants the stuff that they need. Now, I do also put wood chips on top to help break down, but it's a very, very slow decomposing process. because I have some microorganisms, but definitely not as much as you'd find in healthy soil. I mean, if I find an earthworm in one of my bins, I jump for joy. I'm so excited. I have only ever found one earthworm, but I immediately put him back, covered him up, and I was so happy. It made my day. When I get my land one day, I'm definitely going to look into other forms of fertilization, like with manure, because these are ones that are more slower break down and continue to add those nutrients to the soil for a longer amount of time. Those are definitely great options. Not an option for me right now. So we're going to go ahead and see if we can troubleshoot some of the issues that I am having with my plants and try to figure out what would be the best fertilizer to use on them at this moment. I have a feeling it's going to be pretty easy to figure out. Most of my plants are all in the same state at the moment, but we'll see. Let's learn together. Okay, so first off, guys, good news. I have figured out that these growing right here are actually mustard greens. Reason I know that is because I actually dug out my seed packets and it looks a lot closer to a mustard green than it did a collard green. So great. Got some nice big mustard greens growing here. Super excited about that. But as we can see, I am encountering some problems. These big leaves are starting to turn yellow. If you can see, they have kind of like this veininess of this purple going through it. The leaves are dying. Like you can see back here's a leaf that's died and fallen off already. And that's what happens. They'll slowly just all turn yellow and then they'll end up rotting off at their base and just fall off. And I don't want that. I want to be able to eat my mustard greens. So these guys, from the signs that they're giving me at the state that they're in, I mean, they look like they're probably about teenagers right now. You know, they're getting there, but they're not producing their best. And this yellowing is their stress. You can see it's even formulating on some of the top leaves. These guys need nitrogen. So I'm going to end up giving these guys nitrogen in order to help out with leaf production and general health. But I'm also going to be giving them a formula with some phosphorus in it, because remember, phosphorus is for top to bottom help growth. And these guys are really suffering in their leaves right now. I think they need both of them. So right here, what we have are some carrots that I planted. Again, as a fall crop, and carrots do take a little bit of time. But as you can see, yes, I do have a smaller amount of greens on my carrots, and they're focusing on their root development, but we are also getting some yellow leaves there. Yellow is a sign of stress. These leaves aren't supposed to be yellow. So even though this is a root vegetable, my plant needs more nitrogen. So I'm going to go ahead and give these plants some nitrogen today too. Okay, so those are just some examples of the plants that I have that are needing that additional help. There are more, but a lot of them are the same in what their needs are right now. It's winter. Plants grow a lot slower in the winter. There's just not enough sun there to really give them that oomph. So I'm going to provide them with some additional nutrients. Also, just with how much time that they've had to sit in the soil and all the, as the months go by, the rain washes away all of the nutrients I already provided them at the beginning of the growing season. So they don't have those anymore to rely on. I need to replenish that for them. Otherwise, I'm just going to get a whole bunch of dead plants. I already have enough of those. So I'm going to grab some fertilizers and get to work. So as for how much fertilizer you should be applying, there are instructions on the back of the bags, and it tells you how much for one plant, how much for a row of plants if you're using it for a gardening. I'm not so technical. It's kind of like cooking. You can always add more. You can't take away when it comes to spice and stuff, same for fertilizer. So I just literally like to grab a handful and just kind of sprinkle it around the base of these plants as I massage it into the soil. Like I said, pull it away and then add it. And I like to give it a chance for me to see how it ends up looking. If I decide later on that it needs some more help, again, I can always add more then. But for right now, we're just going to add a little bit. Another great thing, it is really good to add fertilizer after your soil is damp. So whether that means after it's been raining or after you've just watered it really well, it really helps it break down a lot easier. So guys, I just got done fertilizing my plants, and I realized I forgot to talk about one other type of fertilizer. I was using granular fertilizers today, but if your plant really needs a quick boost, something that they can get easy access to immediately, there's also liquid fertilizers, which this one just happens to be Miracle-Gro, and it's an all-purpose plant food. This one I've had for a while. Now, unfortunately, this was just like the 10 for 10, and I bought this before I really knew what I was doing, so this is not an organic fertilizer, though they do create them, even if you're looking for the same company, that you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, and it comes in organic variety as well. But with liquid varieties, you just basically have to follow the instructions, mix the powder up. I was using my watering can in order to do it. Mix the powder up with some water, and the only thing is I would say to watch out for, though, is that some of them you apply directly to the leaves, others you apply to the base of the plant. So just look at your container. I had to actually go online to see what type this one was. This one is one that you apply directly onto the leaves. But yeah, so liquid fertilizers are great for immediate nutrients that your plant needs. Granular are for a little bit more of a slower process. But with all of these fertilizers, you have to keep in mind that as time goes by, erosion happens through water, through wind. These fertilizers will deplete from your soil, whether your plant's using them or the elements are washing them away. So keep an eye on your plant. Look for the signs that it needs some additional help. If it doesn't have any signs, it's good. Leave it alone because then you'll cause a problem by adding too much. My beds, at least, they had already gone through a long summer season, and though I did amend them a little bit, it seems like I didn't put enough nitrogen in my soil to make up for the fact that I'd had a summer season. And usually in summer, you end up planting a lot of things, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, a lot of things that require lots of nitrogen. And it seems like they just sucked it all out of my plant beds, and I needed to add some more. So that was the bulk of what I did today. But always keep in mind what that NPK stands for. Take a look at your plant, try to figure out what the problem is, if it does need nutrients, and then do some research. I did a lot of research in order to figure all this stuff out. And some of it is through trial and error. Like, I tried growing carrots in the summer next to tomatoes. The carrots were like this big. Why? Because I was putting nitrogen on top of them. They had great, brilliant greens and an itty bitty root. Also, I tried growing them in summer because I read online that you can grow carrots next to tomatoes and they do really well. Well, that might work for maybe, like, I don't know, Canada, but it doesn't work for Georgia, I'll tell you that. Carrots you do not grow in summer. Don't do that. If you read that, don't do that. That's a mistake I've already made. Don't do it. Anyways, hopefully I've been able to share a little bit of my knowledge. I fertilized today. I'll keep an eye out to see if my plants need any more. If it goes terribly wrong, I'll let you know. If it goes amazingly right, I'll let you know. Just thank you for sharing this with me, and hopefully you can join me for the next lesson. Thanks.